Hello and welcome to Jaw Law. I'm your host, Joe McGregor from Dallas, Texas, from the law firm of McGregor and Doblad. And today, we are taking another grain of salt.
Any material communicated on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Nothing herein should be considered to create an attorney-client relationship. Please consult an attorney for legal advice on your matter.
All right, if you caught last episode, you heard me talk about taking online advice with a grain of salt. Recently, and I say recently, probably within the last month, I was having a conversation with a client who said that she had attended a seminar, and in that seminar, the leader of the seminar, is just what I'll call him, highly recommended a certain book. And that book is called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Now, what I want to make sure is that I'm not, quote unquote, dissing the book or this recommender. The book is fascinating. It is going to appear on list upon list of popular business books. And the author, Jim Collins, has done way more in his career than I have done in mine. I'm not here to say that it is invalid or that it is not useful. I have read the book, if memory serves correctly, 3 times. So obviously I find some value and insight in this book. But let me talk to you today about taking things like this with a grain of salt. By the way, not picking on Good to Great, just using it as an example. But to give you a quick overview, Jim Collins was a professor, and he really lays out his book. The idea of good to great are companies who were already good, but they did some things that took them into the next stratosphere. They really launched them into this legendary business status. Obviously, the analog to us in dentistry is, what if you have a good practice, but it's maybe not great, or at least not great by your standards, and you're looking for that recipe to take your practice to the next level. This consultant is suggesting, hey, if you will take the lessons, the principles conveyed in this book, and you apply them to your dental practice, that's how you get there. That's how you make that leap up. So in Good to Great, what Jim Collins does is he assembles a team of researchers, and they just comb through all the data, and they've set out this very, very stringent criteria, and they're looking for those companies that went from good and then to great, and then they tried to work back and understand, well, what were the things they did that got them from good to great? And of course, that was his book. And this book, just the concept sounds amazing. And so it has sold just millions of copies. And it is, like I said, on the top of all kinds of best business books. So why would I have a problem with it? Why would I encourage people to read it with a grain of salt? Well, like I said, this is a book I had read 3 times. I majored in business, so I was all into these types of books early in my educational career and in my career. I had always had designs on starting my own firm. So I was like, yeah, what kind of books are going to help me get a good law firm and make that law firm as best as it can be? And this naturally appeals to anybody who's thinking in that way. Then I read a book, and it's called The Halo Effect by Phil Rosenwig. And it basically said, not so fast, Jim Collins. And certainly this book is not the only book who has done this. There's been Wall Street Journal articles. There have been other books. But basically what they're saying is, okay, some good ideas, but Jim Collins goes through a lot of effort to tell us how much research went into it so that it gave it this air of authority and science. However, these contrarian authors are saying, actually, Jim Collins has committed some pretty standard biases, some biased thinking, some logical fallacies, and they go through and they help us understand why the book needs to be taken with a grain of salt and why it's not necessarily, at least not as transferable as Collins would suggest. Now, what the heck does this have to do with dentistry? For me, there are two lessons here. Number one, there are a lot of great business books, and there are a lot of great things to learn from those business books, including Good to Great. However, my experience has been that the books who are teaching us how to think, not what to think, but how to think, how to be critical in your thinking, those are the best books. Because, or at least in some way, when you do read a prescriptive book that tells you what to think, you're able to think about it and say, okay, these 5 things that the author thinks I should do, well, 4 of them make a lot of sense, but that 5th one, that's faulty thinking on that author's part. And before you go too far, remember that if there was a book that had all the answers, all of us would read that book. No book has all the answers. No one author has all the answers. So you do have to comb through a lot to get there. And that's why I say getting a book that teaches you how to think and being critical about what you're reading, again, taking things with a grain of salt and figuring out what you think really will help and what will not. That's a more useful approach. The second reason I bring this up, listen, I tell this book thing, I tell it to a lot of people because a lot of people who are very entrepreneurial, they will mention books to me like, hey, I read this and this is what I aspire to do. A lot of people who are aspiring to create great practices and practice systems. And I'm all for that. I promise I'm your cheerleader. But as someone who's kind of been there, right? Like I had that same ferocity in my vision. And then here I am, and I have a law firm and it's fun. I have a great time with it. But I have learned some things between here and there. And this is one of them. I think that when I read that book, The Halo Effect, it kind of burst my bubble just a little bit. And I'm like, wait a minute. I have subscribed to Jim Collins. I'm part of his fan club. And you're telling me that it's not as based in science as he wants us to believe? Anyway, it opened my eyes just a little bit more. And I have suggested to other people through the years, man, yes, read Good to Great, but you should also read other books, again, that help you think, right? To teach you how to think, not what to think. And ultimately, I don't think you can go wrong with those types of books. They're more boring. They're not cool. They don't have nearly as sexy of stories, but they will help you. Second reason I bring this up, though, because this has long been part of I'm not anti-consultant. I love consultants. We have some great relationships with some dental consultants that we think do a great job. And we are willing to recommend good consultants. My problem has been that the good consultants are hard to find. 90% of the consultants we see, and that is a conservative number, 90% of the consultants we see out there, either our clients have regrets and misgivings about hiring them, or at least we do. We have questions about what kind of value they're truly bringing. And again, most of the consultants, they are someone who figured out a thing in dentistry. The good consultants, or at least the better consultants, have figured out some things, right? They have figured out a good hygiene program. They have figured out a good treatment selling plan. And they package this up into a sales program and sell it to you. Their job is to sell you on what they are doing, not necessarily to do what they're selling. That's been our big critical complaint about consultants. Again, there's some great consultants, but when we look at consultants and we try to weigh how much value we think they bring to the table, the ones we think are the most valuable are ones who are honest about what they are, right? They are someone who is going to come in and say, I am really good at HR. Let me do this HR function for you for this amount of time. This is how much I'm going to charge you. And this is the result I'm going to deliver. Someone else comes in and says, I am really good at selling treatment plans. Let me teach you that. And you, by the end of 6 months, are going to be way better at it. And so on and so on. What we see a lot of times in the consulting world is an enormous outflow of cash to the consultant and a questionable inflow of new information, and specifically information that is going to last, that's going to actually change the way you do things. And so when we're talking about taking a grain of salt, when we talk about a book teaching us how to think, we learn those same lessons. It's not just about the books we read, but it's also about the things that people are trying to sell us. There's a lot of money in dental consulting. And I almost argue that there shouldn't be as much. My point is you need to be able to find a consultant who is able to transfer information from one context to another, because every practice is different. Every practitioner is different. And so you need to be able to assess how likely they are to do that, to transfer their knowledge from situation to situation. And the way you do that is being able to think about what they are telling you. And then when they're in your practice, being able to observe and assess what they're doing. Are they committing logical fallacies? Are they succumbing to confirmation bias and things like that? You do those things, you learn how to think, you will become a more discerning buyer, so therefore saving yourself some money, and you will become a more enlightened leader. And that's all we have for today. I'm recording this Thanksgiving week. I am so thankful that you tune in and you listen to this. I'd love to hear from you. My cell is 972-975-2215. Love to hear any questions that you've got, any feedback, and any topic episodes. Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you next time.